Moving on to the vol side of things, realized vol has been stable this week in the low 40s for Bitcoin. Spot obviously testing a 25k handle on Friday, but managing to recover quickly as discussed. ETH realized has declined slightly though, coming in more in line with where BTC is, as ETH struggles to pick up its own narrative. Implied vols drifting lower into the weekend, but then they did bounce. You see here this bounce in the green and white lines, which is the 1 week and the 1 month vol. In Bitcoin, we saw that bounce. We didn't really see a similar bounce in Ethereum vol, right? That's on the back of some flows that we'll talk about in a bit. So positive carry because of that spike in implied vol. We are back to positive carry in Bitcoin. It's not massive, but it's it's better than nothing, I guess, for the gamma sellers. But it hasn't really been that spike in implied hasn't been justified yet by a real realized move. So that's why we've got positive carry here for the gamma sellers to harvest, right? So we'll see if it stays like that or if that gap closes one way or another. ETH carry, on the other hand, is near zero. Implieds have been better offered there, down to the lows, and so those vols contain very little risk premium right now. Now, last week we said keep an eye on gold to get a read on the crypto direction, and that seemed to be correct because precious metals were heavy last week, especially silver, which was down 6.5%, and crypto obviously tested the bottom end of the range. We don't really see equities as a strong driver for crypto markets right now. If you look at the Bitcoin Nasdaq correlation 30-day, that's down to like 30% from 80% last year. So really, I don't think crypto cares too much what stocks do in the near term, at least. Where I do think they care a lot more what gold does, okay, particularly Bitcoin. All right, looking at term structure, we see it looks pretty flat on Bitcoin. You can see the green line, very flat, if anything, slightly higher in the front end, so very, very slight inversion. Whereas we're starting to go into a very slight contango here in ETH as the realized kind of drifted lower. We haven't really seen any fireworks below 1800, so I think 1700 is kind of your bigger support level now on ETH for us to get any material moves. The vol spread has been heading lower, obviously led by the front because the front end Bitcoin has spiked, which has taken the front end spread down below zero again. So BTC Gamma is basically got more demand for it right now than ETH does. The back end of the curve, however, has kind of stayed anchored in that 6 month spot, kind of where it was, very, very close to zero, or just slightly above zero. Realized vol is still around 5 vols in both 30-day and 10-day. So that's probably why the back end is kind of managing to hold at zero anyway. And then what do we think? We think owning BTC upside and ETH downside seems to be the sensible play here, right? In the recent uptick in BTC front end, that shows us that there is some short-term bullish sentiment coming back. We haven't seen really the same thing in ETH. And so we'd expect Bitcoin probably to outperform in any rally in the near term. Okay, that's kind of what we're getting a signal from the options market anyway. Okay, other reasons for that, until yesterday, put SKEW had been expanding as crypto markets were showing weakness, testing the lower end of the range at the end of last week. BTC SKEW got to 3 vols for puts, and even the back end where there's a call premium that had shrunk to sub 1 vol point. However, as short dated call buys have come in the last couple of days, the SKEW's reversed dramatically. It's now trading back at a call premium, and it's doing that across the entire curve. So the front end is suddenly flipped from -2 or 3 vols, i.e. puts over, to plus 2 vols for calls over, and then it moves down to about 1 vol as you go to the back of the curve. So the back of the curve didn't do a whole lot, but that front end SKEW really being super responsive to the flows that have been coming in and to the spot direction. Now, looking at Ethereum SKEW, that also turned around. It hit as much as 6 vols for the weekly puts, but has now reverted back to only about a 1 vol point put premium. And now the belly of the curve, kind of the 1 month to 3 month area, that still has a 2 to 3 vol put premium. And that remains divergent from where BTC SKEW is, where that's more like a couple of vols the other way. Okay, so we think this condition where BTC and ETH have got opposite signs in their SKEW, we think that could persist for some time and is becoming a theme within crypto markets, right? Where the idea is that the digital gold narrative of Bitcoin is going to leave a tail to the upside, and then the kind of general, crypto being correlated to risk assets is more to do with ETH, and therefore that will kind of, if equities have got a skew to the downside and that skew's going bid, then that's going to make Ethereum have a bit of a bid for downside as well. Okay, that's kind of how we feel about that. Looking at dashboards, they are saying buy calls in both BTC and in ETH. But we, as we said, we tend to think that BTC is probably the better spot to be buying calls if you're going to buy calls anywhere. Looking at the flows, that's certainly what the flows have been doing. As BTC took a nosedive below 26K, put buyers did initially come in. So we did see put buying here in the 25.5 to 24K strikes. But then once that was digested and we got the recovery, we saw call buying come in. Very short dated, 19th of May, 28th. That's this big purple bar. A chunk of those calls getting bought. 26th of May, 29th. Some call spreads as well between these strikes. And then these big blue bars were the June 31K, 35K call spread that was also bought in decent size here in like a couple of thousand lots blocked. So definitely a reasonable amount of upside flow still. About 70-30 for calls still, okay, even on a week where we didn't really rally. Moving on to Ethereum flows, remaining more bearish. Short-term call sellers still pretty prevalent in the 1900 and 2000 strike zone. Put buyers coming in from the 1800 to the 1600 strikes in the very front end again. That's 19th of May, 26th of May expiries. We did see some June buying as well in the 1800 puts too. And then the other big clips, which were more vol-related clips, there was a big seller of June set call calendars. That's a short Vega trade, kind of like a call overwriting from a miner, and they keep rolling that out further down the curve. That's the type of flow we've seen for a while in there. Another big clip. And then in terms of July, we saw some July 2300 call buyers, but that was traded delta hedged. Okay, so those are your main flows in Ethereum. But I would say in general, even there was call activity, I would say it was less bullish call activity because it wasn't naked buying like what we saw in Bitcoin. Okay, looking over at the gamma side of things, gamma positioning is pretty similar to where we were last week. Still see short gamma on BTC, but long on Ethereum. You can see in terms of how we've moved. When Bitcoin did trade down, it did spike briefly into positive gamma. But then as we bounced and the call buys came in, we're back in negative. The big short strikes for this Friday are 27K and 28K, which are providing the street with short gamma exposure, which is why we think on the upside, things could get a bit spicy maybe on Bitcoin. You might get a reasonable realized move. Can't really say the same thing for Ethereum. It's stayed in positive gamma all week. And that 1800 strike is monstrous relative to everything else. And the street appears to be long 26th of May and 30th of June expiry, right? So this kind of helps explain a little bit why, in the absence of any big narrative, Ethereum just can't get going, basically, right? It just can't really move. It's kind of stuck like glue to this 1800 strike, which is what makes me think, at least in the near term, that condition probably holds, and we'd rather be buying calls, if anything, on the likes of Bitcoin, okay? That is it for this week's Crypto Weekly. Thanks a lot for listening as always, and I'll catch you guys next week. Cheers.